Well, I think it's important to talk about loss and damage. It's not a new subject because the term has been around for 20 years, as people have said here. But I think it's coming into a new context, and I think in the sort of flow of ideas, the way I see it anyway, is that when we came to understand that climate change was a really important global issue, we first thought about mitigating the emissions. Then we realized that was unlikely to be enough, certainly in the short term, and we thought we needed to adapt. But now we realize that even if we adapt, there are likely to be all sorts of residual damages and losses. And I think the loss and damage debate addresses that new emerging issue that we're becoming much more aware of. Certainly, if we are ineffective, if the international regime is ineffective in keeping global warming within the limits, the 2-degree limit, for instance, that we've set ourselves, that in the long term there are major damages that we will have to deal with and limits to our capacity to adapt and therefore transformative consequences. And understanding that and researching that, I think, is why it's important to be here. Well, that's it's an enormous challenge, I think, now to really try to understand where these losses are likely to be in the future, where they are now, because I think there are marginal communities, very vulnerable communities, who are already facing large climate-linked losses and limits to their capacity to adapt. I think now that we have a better understanding of what these limits to adaptation might be, and we have an emerging risk-based framework for understanding them, I think we can begin to do. I'm a scientist, so I think of the challenge now in terms of the research challenge. We can begin to try to understand where there are communities who are really facing escalating losses to do with sea level rise or drought or coastal erosion, and where there may be emerging limits to adapt, and how we deal with that. Whether we only respond through humanitarian interventions once there are disasters, or if we can find ways of predicting where these limits might be emerging, small island states for instance, and planning for dealing with the large losses that are likely to be coming down the line. So I think it's that awareness and now beginning to do lots of new research, trying to understand those thresholds and limits and the kinds of policy approaches we might be able to do at local level but also international level.